board here, but we could try again.
So yesterday, there it is.
Oh, we have a board. Should we go for the board?
And I have a photo I can send to you.
Thank you, sir. All right, that's not bad. Let's see if we can get the board going. Do we have a marker for the board? Aha. Okay. So in the meantime, let's just try and explain it. Maybe someone can get a marker. We're speaking about first and foremost the power again of the body to be able to force the soul to come down. And then we explained it's not exactly forcing because the soul actually desires to come down into the body because it feels and senses that the body has a higher source. And since the nature of light is to go up, on one hand we say that it's forced by the body to come down because it wouldn't have gone down unless it was coerced by some other thing. Its intrinsic nature is to go up. However, at the end of the day, it's really a willful descent. Why? Because the soul senses the higher source of the body. And we started to explain that this is the same for dibur, for speech, that you could have intelligence, right? But then there's the actual physical speech. Thanks, Moshe. Then there's the actual physical speech. And for some reason, same concept, the intelligence agrees to and wants to come down and be spoken into a physical medium because it senses the higher source of the letters, like the kalim, the letters, which is essentially the reaching a higher aspect of the soul. And we started to explain that the soul and the light is sort of sourced in chokhmah, and the letters are sourced in Kesser, right? But we started to explain even deeper than that in the level of Chokhmah, there's even an aspect of the soul and the light which is also in Kesser, right? Because there's a quality called Chokhmah Shebekesser. What's another name for Chokhmah Shebekesser? Koach HaMaskil, right? And another name maybe? Chokhmah Stima, we called it, right? So we ran into it. Why don't you come around? We'll find you a spot. You're behind the board. You're not going to make the video here.
I'm in a spot.
You are in a spot.
David.
So where we ran into sort of trouble, where the Rebbe Rashab started doing some interesting gymnastics over here, was that when we started to explain that the source of the letters was in fact higher than the source of the light, right? We quoted the Tanya, and we said that the source of the letters is from Ikadmos HaSeichel. I'm getting a sense that everybody's sort of distracted with different things. Stay with me here. We said the source of the letters was from Kadmos HaSeichel. What does Kadmos HaSeichel mean? The primordial intellect. Why was that a troubling statement for us? Who remembers? Yes, Noam.
It should have been from the essence.
It should have been from the essence. I think you were the same man that said that yesterday.
Yeah,
why is Noam the only man in? Right? Does everyone understand Noam's point there? Why should it have said it's from the essence and not from Kadmos HaSeichel? When we're talking about the source of the letters, which is higher than the source of the light, why should the Alter Rebbe seemingly have said that it comes from the essence and not what he does say, which obviously is correct, we don't understand it yet, which is that it comes from the primordial intellect?
Because it's
Anybody else? Why? It's not Makif. I mean, that's not the answer.
so good.
What's the difference between the two?
What's the difference between what two?
Essence and primordial.
You tell me.
Primordial is also the union of primus and keter.
But what's the problem with the statement that it comes from Kadmos HaSeichel, as opposed to what it should say, that the letters come from the essence? Nobody knows?
Wait.
Well, the whole class yesterday was based on this question.
Answer?
I just want a simple answer. You can give me potential or actual or theoretical,
The
whatever it is,
letters
just
are
an answer.
vessels.
What's that?
The letters are just vessels.
Letters are just vessels.
And we know vessels are soviv.
Okay, I'm with you now on the Makiv answer.
Huh?
Okay,
Yeah,
now
exactly.
I'm tracing back here. Yeah.
And then we know that comes from the level of the essence of Hashem, the soviv light. And
You're dancing around it pretty good there. Yes, but what's the point? What's wrong with saying kadmus haseichel?
Because Chassidus is um,
What's the problematic word? Kadmus or seichel? Seichel. Yes,
there's no
no.
relevancy to seichel.
It should have no relevancy to seichel. But guys, let's start over, right? We're going like this. We've been talking the whole time about the idea of the lights and the vessels, right? We made an analogy that this is also maybe we'll eat after class, sorry to bother you, the light and the vessels, right? And then we made an analogy also to soul and body. Yeah, let's keep it all together. We have light and vessels. That's the same thing as soul and body. That's the same thing as intelligence and letters. Is everyone familiar with this, right? It's all the same idea. Intelligence means that you have like sort of the light of the intellect or the soul. And the idea is that seemingly what's higher, the body or the soul? Normally we think that the idea of course, soul is higher, right? Normally we think the idea that what you're thinking or feeling is much more sophisticated than the simple physical letters that you're going to say, right? So normally we're thinking light is more profoundly godly than a vessel, which is merely holding the light. So in all these areas, the whole mimer so far is coming to tell us a chiddush, that the vessel's source, at least, is higher than the light. The simple words, the source of these letters, which are like kalim, are higher than the ideas that are in them, and the body is higher in its source than the soul. And for this reason, all of these, the light gets increased and amplified when it comes into the letters or the body or the vessels, because its experience is suddenly a surge of the source of those letters, bodies, and vessels, right? Which is higher than the light source. Correct? Everyone understands that? Moshe, you with me on that? Yeah. Now what we're saying is, great, so the light comes from seemingly chokhmah, right? All the light is like the highest aspect of the light, the idea is chokhmah, right? And the letters are sourced, let's say, in Keser, which would be higher than chokhmah, higher than seichel, right? Chokhmah is seichel, chokhmah is intellect. We want to say that the letters come from higher than intellect. So therefore, we want to say that the source of the letters is, like Noam said, the essence. The essence is above the concept of seichel. Seichel starts with chokhmah, bina, and das. Those are already a step down, let's say, from Keser, from this idea of this higher essence. Fine, everything is working out so far. That part is not hard. But what is difficult is when the Alter Rebbe comes in and he says that the source of the letters is from kadmus haseichel. Now you understand why that's problematic? Because we want to say that the source of the letters is from beyond the concept of seichel.
Right.
You get that? I need a little bit of a little crowd reassurance here. Not understanding the issue here? One more time. I don't mind saying it 100 times. I just want to make sure that you guys are trying to understand. Do you understand? Anyone understand why this is a problem? We got 1, 2, 3, I think, 4, 5. Okay, so you got to just maybe nod when the proper time comes. All right.
You've got this, the body.
Yeah.
It's from a higher place than the neshama.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So then we're saying that the soul. So with one sort of reference, the soul is higher. We always think the soul is higher than the body. Why do we think that? And then we're saying the body comes from a place higher than the soul. So why would we say one thing? Why do we say the other thing?
Okay, but the point is not that so much. Yes, we've come to this conclusion that the body has a source which is higher than the soul. Obviously, in its fallen state, we're not saying that it looks higher than the soul. The body is enlivened by the soul, etc. But why does the soul agree to come into a body? It senses its higher source. Because the source of the body is higher than the concept of the soul, which is the soul is equal to intellect. You can see that let's make that little connection, right? Soul and intellect are the same thing. Do you understand that part? Like the idea of light, soul, intellect, they're all on one level. Whereas body, letters, and vessels, like the containers, they're on the lower level. And what we're saying is the lower level, it has a higher source than the higher level, right? It falls down to become lower, but in its source, before it all comes out, they're sourced in a higher place. So just the last point I want to make, just to follow up what you're saying, is what we're concerned is that when we try to identify the name of that source, we should use any word except for the word seichel, right? Because the whole point is that light is seichel, light is intellect. We're trying to say that the vessels or the letters, they come from beyond the seichel, right? They come from a place which precedes the seichel, which we usually call the essence, which is beyond the seichel. That's the issue. And here, the Alter Rebbe calls that place, instead of calling it essence, he calls it kadmus haseichel. He brings in this word which kind of confuses us, because it should be something that is beyond seichel, not the primordial seichel. You get this, what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, and Neshama is not seichel. Neshama is like the spark of God. This is the essence of God.
That's exactly right. That's the problem. Why is he calling it seichel? Right. Yeah.
Is it practically problematic that the toilet door is partially open and the curtain isn't covering it, or it's almost...
You want to close the curtain if you don't mind? We're having a request from closing the curtain.
Rabbi, do you remember when we talked about the different spheros and this is Chochmah, the Kenter,
Okay, let's go into the spheros now.
right? And that helps visualize it because
Yeah, we're gonna
Are
find
we
it.
saying that the source of the body is higher than the soul, or the source of the body is higher than the source of the soul?
The source of the body is higher than the soul, and quite frankly, higher than the source of the soul, which is what we're going to get into right now. It's even higher than the source of the soul, right? So, what do we start to explain? That how will we now understand this? So we started to explain as follows. When you look at the level which is above Chokhmah, we call this Keser, right? Now, inside of Keser, you have 10 spheros, just like every sphere has 10 spheros. Like we're counting the Omer right now. You have Chesed Shebechesed, Gevur Shebechesed.
Yes.
So in Keser also, you have all the spheros in Keser. So one of those spheros is called Chokhmah Shebekeser, right? So we're saying that Chokhmah Shebekeser, we're calling that the Koach HaMaskil. We've discussed it many times in the class. And the Koach HaMaskil is basically the source of the intellect in your mind. Right? You have like this generator of intellect inside the mind called the Koach HaMaskil. And this source is actually still part of the light as opposed to the vessel component, right? We have basically these two different polarities, right? There's lights and vessels, even though we've gone up into the Keser, which seemingly means we've gone out of the the realms of intellect purely, because Keser in general is above intellect. Nonetheless, in Keser itself, there's a sphera called Chochmah of Keser, which we're going to say is still called the quality of light. It's not yet the source of the vessels there. But in Keser itself, there's two aspects of Keser, right? There's the Panemius of Keser and the Chitzonius of Keser. What is it called, the Chitzonius of Keser? What's the name for that sphere? For that? What's it called, the Chitzonius of Keser? Arich Anpin. Let's familiarize ourselves with these terms. Very important to know the terms if we're going to start using them. Arich Anpin. Why is this called Arich Anpin? This is kind of getting a little bit off the topic. Why is Keser called, the lower part of Keser called Arich Anpin? First, what do the words Arich Anpin mean?
Long face.
Long faces. Why is it called long faces? Noah?
Because it's still relevant to the other spheres, but it's beyond them.
Faces is like a sort of another way of saying spheros, right? I'm agreeing with you, yeah. But in other words, why does that mean long faces? I'm just trying to put the two together. So the faces are called spheros. Each sphere is like a face, right? So we call them long faces. Why are we calling them long? The spheros of Keser, the lower part of Keser, we're calling this Erich Anpin, which is called long faces. Why are those spheros called long? Anybody? I'll give you to juxtapose it. There's another set of spheros called Zer Anpin. What does Zer Anpin mean?
small face.
You ever heard of Zer Anpin?
Yes.
Zer Anpin is what? What exactly referring to when we say Zer Anpin? What's that? The spheros of Atzilus, right? In Atzilus, let's say the 7 lower emotional spheros. They're called Zer An. They're called the small faces. But more particularly, just the spheros inside of Atzilus are called the small faces. The spheros above Atzilus L'chaim, l'chaim. I think we should just do a quick round of switching chairs. Everybody sit in the chair to the guy, make musical chairs. Okay, so ready? The spheros inside of Atzilus are called the little faces, Ze'er Anpin. The spheros above Atzilus, which are in Keser of Atzilus, particularly the lower part of Keser, which is called Erech Anpin. Why are these called little and these are called long? They're both called faces, Anpin. Why are the ones inside of Atzilus, particularly like you said, the emotional ones, are called small, and the ones in Keser, which is the lower part of Keser, Erech Anpin, are called big or long? Yeah.
Does the small ones have like form?
Yes, the small ones are basically have come into some type of limitation at some level, even though it's Atzilus, it's pretty high level of limitation, but they can be contained in vessels to some degree. Whereas the Erech Anpin, the spheros in Keser, they're called long because they basically go on forever. There's no end to any of them, right? Because why? Because since you're in the Keser, you've sort of gone beyond the state of limitation, right? That's what Keser is. It precedes the coming into the world. In general, Keser is called Makif or Sovev, right, which means it doesn't have a beginning and doesn't have an end. And therefore, the spheros there, normally you think of a sphere as like a finite thing. Each of the spheros in the lower part of Keser even are going on forever. Now, in those spheros, one of them is called Chochma of Keser. And what we're saying, go back to our plot here, it was a little deviation. What we're saying is that even the source of Chochma, right, which is the source of the light, it too is still on the light meter as opposed to the vessel meter. So it's right. So if you want to go one step higher, what's the Panemius of Keser called? The Chitzonius of Keser is called Erech Anpin. What's the Panemius of Keser called? Atik, right? Atik Yomi. What does Atik Yomi mean? Just while we're defining terms, Atik Yomi. It literally means the ancient of days. But how are we going to? Why does that mean what we're saying? Which means it's the inner dimension of Keser, so high and so far beyond. Not exactly. What does Atik mean? The word Atik, besides ancient, it comes from the word to copy something, right? In other words, like hataka, right, means to take something off and remove it from something else, right? And what is yomin is another, again, reference to the spheros. There's some guys that are called the days, because you have, for example, 6 days, and then the seventh day is like the lower seven spheros. The days are also called spheros. This one, instead of being called long faces or infinite spheros, it's called removed from days, which means it's not in any way associated with the concept of spheres the way we know them. It's so high that it's actually removed from days. That's what Atik Yomin actually means, like in a Kabbalistic sense. That the whole notion of days and spheros, it's removed from them. Now, it doesn't mean that there's not spheros there, strangely, because every section here has 10 spheros. It's just that, just like there's a huge difference between the spheros of Zer Anpin, which are little ones, which are finite, so to speak, and then there's between Erech Anpin, which are spheres that go on forever. There's also a level of spheros which is completely beyond comprehension, which are beyond spheros. There's spheros beyond spheros. They're called removed from spheros, right? And this is called Atik Yomi. This is called the Panemius of the Keser. Now, is there a sphere there called Chochma of Atik Yomi?
No.
Well, certainly there is, because there's 10 spheros in every one of these areas. Now, even though those spheros are like ois spheros, you can't even really, the name sphera, they're defined by not being spheros or being removed from days. Nonetheless, there's 10 spheros there. It just means that those spheros are like some kind of a other operation that we do.
Do all 10 of those spheres have 10 spheres?
Yes, in general, that's how it works, right?
What I'm saying, if that's their like most raw form, you think that they don't necessarily have any of that more appeared to visit inside themselves.
You can make all kinds. Let's not complicate ourselves, right? Let's stay in the notion that there is something called the 10 spheres of Atik, and one of them is called Chochma of Atik, right? Now we got to our destination point. Chochma of Atik it's called intellect, right? Because it's called Chochma, and yet it has nothing to do with intellect whatsoever. And so this is what the Alter Rebbe was hinting to when he said that the source of the letters come from the Kadmus HaSeichel. What bothered us was we were saying, wait a second, the source of the letters is supposed to be completely beyond intellect, beyond light, right? Beyond the sort of soul powers. Why are you calling it Seichel? And now we're allowing for that to be called Seichel. Why? Because we go into such a deep, panemius place of Kesser that even that thing which is called Seichel is totally beyond any connection with any spheros, including Seichel. And therefore, we've sort of got to our destination point, that the source of the letters, which comes from the essence, there's not a problem calling the chokhmah of Panemius HaKeser, right, the essence. Because it's so far removed that it doesn't have the normal properties of any spheros. It's a chokhmah of Atik. Therefore, that's kind of synonymous with the essence, and we've resolved our issue. That the source of the letters is higher than the source of the light. What's the source of the light? Chokhmah. And if you want to be a big shot, you could say it's even Chokhmah of Keser, the lower part of Keser, is still the source of the light. But the vessels, the source of the vessels is from the higher part of Keser, Panemius HaKeser, and if you want to, even if you want to say it's from Chokhmah of that Keser, Chokhmah Stima, the Panemius of Chokhmah Stima, that's fine because it doesn't really have any association with Chokhmah anyway, or Seichel. We're just calling it Kadmus HaSeichel. And therefore, we've gotten back to where we started, that the letters come from the essence, and the chokhmah comes from the light, from the lower source above. Anybody follow that little train?
Yes.
Following? Yosef, how you doing back there?
Yeah.
You look like you're busy. Caught you. But you're for sure not going to be able to follow along if you're doing something else. And if Hebra, it's just, you cannot do this and that same time. Yeah.
Is right above that the essence, or?
Yeah, so we said there is even something like, so to speak, beyond Atik, but Atik is unified with the essence in such a way that we can call it essence.
Why couldn't we just play that game forever and just keep saying there's a level above that, and there's a level above that, and there's a Kesser of a Panemius above that, and there's a,
We do. We just didn't get to that page yet. No, but at certain level, there is the, so to speak, origin of the concept of spheros inside of God. And at that level, those spheros have zero form.
The primordial.
They're right? And so this is kind of this strange place where we just arrived at, where God is basically one and many at the same time. And that's an incomprehensible fact. So the more you think about it, the more it will just drive you crazy. It's there and it's not there at the exact same time. These spheros are there. If you're going to say there's actually spheros sitting there, however, in the essence, then what you're going to wind up doing is making God's essence divisible, which is a no-no. You just crossed it like a boundary. But to say that Hashem does not have the power to be many, also a no-no. You just like crossed another red line. God can do whatever he wants. So basically, this is the secret of God, is that he is both finite and infinite at the same time, and his finite, i.e. the spheros, the division, does not in any way divide or hamper or tamper with his being singular and one. So at some point, you don't have to keep breaking it down. You get to that point where those, and it's basically Atik, Panemius of Atik. Although you're right, we did say Atik here. There is such a thing called Panemius of Atik. So there is one more level even of this spheral configuration. So there's Erech Anpin, there's Atik, and there's Panemius of Atik, which we didn't actually discuss, right? But at the end of this, where we left off yesterday, the Rebbe Rashab sort of concludes and says, and basically, even though we dialed this into a very specific place, it's generally, we call that the essence. And that's where we left off. Okay, I'm going to take a couple questions here. Yeah?
Last question I have.
Yeah. Okay.
You're saying that this is the source of like the spheros then? Like
We're saying it's the source of the letters and the kalim.
Yeah, but the spheros are like kalim, right?
The spheros are not necessarily kalim. There's also spheros of light. There's light spheros, and then there's something called kalim, right? And remember when we said that even in Erech Anpin, when we said that they're long spheros, it means that there's lights that go in infinite directions that are not containable and they don't have any edges, but there's still 10 lights there, right? So those are lights. They're not nothing to do with the vessel. We didn't get to the root of the vessels yet, right? So it's not that the vessels actually create these lights per se, right? There's like 10 spheres of light which are somewhat independent from the vessels.
I thought the root of the vessels is the Chachma.
Yeah, the root of the vessels is, but
So the spheres too, then they're like
but the spheres have light and vessel. Which part of the spheres do you mean?
the vessel.
Well, yeah, well, yes, that's exactly the point. The root of the vessels is this place called Chochma Stima, the Panemius of Chochma, of Chochma of Kesser.
Okay.
But what's your question?
I guess I'm asking is there and spheres? Is there and like a sphere that's like small places where the source is the Ati Kesser, or is it like it's not the essence? Right?
Zer Anpin is not vessels really yet. The real vessels, right? Where does Zer Anpin in your soul, so to speak? Let's remap this on the soul. It's your emotions. You're still dealing with light. Intellect and emotion is light. Vessels is when you move your mouth. The letters. So where are the letters in Atzilus? Let's say in Malchus, right? The world of Dibur. So there's a connection with that high place that we just discussed with Malchus, but not so much with Zer Anpin, because Zer Anpin is more connected with light. If you want to go take to the source of Zer Anpin, where are you going to go? A little higher light. What's that called? Chochma. Then you're going to go a little higher light. What's that called? Erech Anpin, the Chochma of the lower part of Kesser. All that is light, right? So there's a higher source to light as well. But when you but it ends, right? The source of light is lower than the source of the vessels. So then if you want to then, if that light then wants to express itself, which it does, into speech, why does it want to express itself into speech? Seemingly it's just going down. No, because the letters that it finds when it goes down are sourced in a source which is above its own source. And therefore it has an access point to something above its own source by going down into those letters. The letters specifically, not the lights. Last question, we're good. Can we continue? We might as well do one or two words inside today.
Is this
Maybe not.
spirits and so on, is describing a creation of God?
There's no creation of God.
No.
Bereshis bara Elokim. The Greeks they wanted to translate it as in the beginning, God was created. That's how you can translate that. Don't do it. It's a bad idea.
Is this describing something that God has created, a creation of God? Not the creation of God, but
I see what you're saying there.
The creation that God has made. Is that the spirits?
Yeah, all things that you see here, it's like DNA, right?
These are spiritual creations.
They are, but they become physical as well. In other words, the form that you see here in this, right? Remember we talked about it yesterday. There's the matter, which we're basically blinded, and we don't realize that we're sitting inside of matter. It's like a fish doesn't realize that he's like made out of water, right? You don't realize that you're actually in a substance. You only think that you're a man. You forget the fact that you're actually matter, right? But the idea is that the man part of you, or the bird, or the tree, or the grass, or anything, that's basically form, right? Now, before that form took a physical form, it was a spiritual form. In other words, there was a spiritual bird. There was a spiritual ox. There was a spiritual lion. You've heard of these things, right? The animals on the Merkava. All forms existed in a spiritual realm before they became physical forms. Now, when they came physical forms, what it means is that those physical forms interacted. They sort of like fused and took a different material and formed that material into their spiritual forms. And it's just like what we're saying that happens when you actually speak. You have a spiritual forms inside of you of intellect and emotions. They're like kind of spiritual compared to your physical speech. And yet when you take those spiritual forms, your ideas, and you enter them into the words, it's like form taking a piece of matter and now joining form with the matter. Why would form want to do that? Seemingly form is so highfalutin and so much more sophisticated than the matter. It's because the source of the matter is higher than the source of the form. The undelineated singularity of this matter is a remnant of the Sovev Kol Almim, infinite Orain Sof light. So the form is interested in tapping into something which has no form. And therefore it comes down into the vessels, letters, body, because those things are actually from the essential formlessness. The only reason that we associate them with form is because the form has grabbed them and made them into form. But if the material of the body and the vessels and the letters comes from a formless place, it's just a material. So all this is a conversation of how Hashem created the world. How he created the spiritual worlds first, which are primarily formed with only a spiritual type of matter. The matter is not much to speak of. There's not really vessels there. All the way down till the physical form. Okay. Moving on.
I hope it's a bad question. Just a concern that you can put it to rest for me.
It doesn't get easier this page, just to let you know.
Yes, I hope not.
Okay.
There's a tremendous irony. I'm thinking about that. We're literally putting words to and describing the thing which is above.
All right, you got to hit the question now.
Zeranpin, is there a chokhmah of that? Because we typically think of that as the.
Yes, that's why I'm going to get into the whole thing. Put it like this.
When we think of Zeranpin as a whole, we can say there's a chokhmah
Yes,
of that?
yes. In other words, on one hand, it refers to the 6 spheros or sometimes the 7 spheros, but each one of these, just like we're saying Kesser, there's only one sphere, but there's really 10 inside. Or Panemius a Kesser is there's really 10 inside. So too, like Chokhmah, there's 10 inside. Bina, there's 10 inside. The Midos, it's a dimension. Even though generally it's associated with 6 spheros, the whole emotional dimension also has 10 spheros. Those 10 spheros are all sort of an emotional level of spheros, so we associate them with these 6, but yes, there's basically certainly Chokhmah, Bina, and Das of Zeir Anpin. Okay, with no further ado, we will begin the class. You're actually going to ask another question right now? Don't. All right, so let's go. You ready, guys? We're taking it from page Yud Aleph. We hope. I think. Here we go. 4 lines down. We just got through saying, and therefore it's not mistaken to call all that fancy talk the essence. Remember that even though we dialed it in as the Chokhmah of Atik and so forth, the Panemius of Chokhmah Stima, it's not wrong to just say generally this is called the essence. Let's try and stick into the class at the end here. V'lechein, 4 lines down at the period. Therefore, al yedei osios, through the letters, mitzad shorsham hakadum, because they come from such a primordial source. Nimshach or haseichel islavish b'osios adibur. That's why the light of the intellect, right, and light and intellect are sort of synonymous, will agree to encloak themselves into the letters of speech, because the letters of speech have such a lofty, high source. Even though the light's nature is to go up, it is going up by going down into those letters because it's accessing the source of those letters. 5 lines down, Amnam. However, Techilas Giloy or Haseichel. However, the beginning of the revelation of the light of Seichel, Lislavish Be'osios Adibur, in order to cloak itself into these letters of speech, even though it's going down there from the standpoint of the letters, in other words, the light wouldn't do it on its own, it's going down there because of the letters. They draw down the light, as we said before. Remember, it's like almost against the light's will, because the light would be busy with its own business if it didn't sense those letters sort of drawing it in. So really, we're saying that the beginning of the light going down is because of something else, namely the letters. Mikom makom kodem sheba pu'ulas ha'osios bepoel. Before it comes the actual effect of these letters in actuality, hainu kodem shemedaber, which means before he actually speaks, right? Because right before the letters actually mumble, nimshach rach b'chinas chitzonias ha'or. It's drawn down only the external part of the light, the koach haseichel, of the koach haseichel, lislavish ba'osios adibur. Right? So in other words, only before the actual speech, in other words, there's like a very, very minute process that he's describing, which is actually a physical process. What happens to us when we talk, we don't pick up on these things. It's like you could like freeze frame the activity of speaking. You'd realize like in a minute, what's it called? Divide seconds into milliseconds, you'd realize that there's some crazy processes taking place. And just before the actual words get spoken, remember we said before that I have to kind of preface this with something that we said before. Remember we said before that when you speak, you get an extra sort of dose from the koach hamaskil. Do you remember we talked about that? Then when a person talks, generally, remember we said, like, for example, a person would come and give his class, he would prepare certain things to say, and it's like, I have the source of everything I want to say, and I'm just going to deliver it to you. What happens all of a sudden when a student asks a question? The teacher has to go back into what we call an or choser, go back and like find deeper things because he was challenged with what he had to say. Therefore, he has to get another dose from a deeper level of the idea to come out. And we said that was basically like getting an influx from the koach hamaskil, which the koach hamaskil did not put out that much information when it first brought the chokhmah idea into the head. Now that it comes down to the bottom and it begins to engage with the speech, it now goes back to the koach hamaskil and gives an extra dose. So there's more wisdom, so to speak, coming out. Remember this?
Yeah.
So what he's saying is before you actually utter the words, that happens first. Right? That nimshach bechinis chitzonias haor, the koach hamaskil, you draw down the external light from the koach hamaskil to come in and cloak into these letters. Amnam kishabayim ha'osios bepoel, when the letters actually come out, hainu kishamadaber esadaber seichol, when you actually speak the words out, az polim etzam ha'osios lamshich gam bechinas haor panimi ba'atzmi shel koach hamaskil. That might have been an extra step that I threw in there. Let's keep it simple. So he says, so basically what he's saying is, before you actually speak, you're getting the regular dose from the rabbi. And when he actually does put into words, when the letters come out of his mouth in actuality, which means you say the intellect, then you affect that the etzem osios, the letters themselves, they like pop back into they jiggle the chain from below and access their source. Lamshich gam bechinas or panimi, to bring a deeper light, va'atzmi, an essential light of the koach hamaskil. So the koach hamaskil essentially digs deeper into itself and brings out more. Why? Because what's above the koach hamaskil, right, we said like this level of chokhmah of atik. And since the letters tap into the koach of the chokhmah of atik, they are therefore able to push more from the chokhmah of arich down into the idea. In other words, you have the chokhmah of arich, which we called before koach hamaskil, and that's basically ready to drop intellect into your mind all day long. Right. But when you then go into dibur, the dibur goes beyond the koach hamaskil into the chokhmah stima of chokhmah of atik. Now that's above the koach hamaskil. It can then induce more wisdom to come out of the koach hamaskil than you originally had, because you accessed something above the koach hamaskil, the panemius of the koach hamaskil. Again? Should we say that again? Understood anything I just said?
So not everyone gets the same dose of this. That's why.
Wait, but just before we ask questions, should I say that again? Do you understand what I said?
What?
I'm going to say it again. You're not answering me, so I'm assuming you don't understand what I said. Right? So look, the koach hamaskil, which is chokhmah of arich. You got that on the map?
What's the chokhmah of arich?
The koach hamaskil. It's chokhmah in Keser, in the lower part of Keser.
Not the panemius of Keser.
Not the panemius of Keser. But you say, what's Keser? You serious? Keser is the sphere above chokhmah. Right? It goes Keser, chokhmah, bina. I don't know. You've made a long diagram there and you're just kind of showing it to me. Let me...
I sent you your diagram.
You have that?
I sent it to you.
Okay. All right, if you're going to ask right now what is Keser, then I'm throwing in the towel. We'll have to talk about that afterwards, because I'm assuming that everyone knew what Keser was. It's a very important component of this conversation. But it's basically the sphera above Chokhmah, and in general, it sort of precedes what we call the general Histalshlus. Okay, I can't go into that right now. But the point is like this. When a person has an idea, the external part of the Keser, which is called Erech Anpin, which has a sphere in it called Chokhmah, we're calling it the Koach HaMaskil, it drops an idea into your head. When that idea goes down and interacts with speech, the speech then jiggles its own source of the letters, which is above the koach hamaskil. It's what we call the penimis of the koach hamaskil. It's chokhmah, not of erech anpin, but chokhmah of atik, right? And therefore, it's like sort of above what the source of your original idea, and therefore it can force more to come out of the koach hamaskil, and therefore you're certainly in your idea is enlarged, right, and enlightened with a deeper pulse from the original koach hamaskil that sent the idea down to begin with.
So the speaking itself
Yes.
has a pulling effect on the higher intellect.
Yes.
It pulls more forward.
I would say pushes almost, right, because it's above it. But yes, it draws down more when you actually put the letters, because the letters hit their source. The source then pushes more out of the original source of the intellect.
To generate new ideas by speaking.
That's right.
Far more than just thinking.
Exactly. That's the whole point of
So
this.
we haven't changed the message.
We have not changed the message one little
We're
bit.
just going deeper into it, trying to understand the back
The
end.
mechanics of it.
Yeah.
Because, you could say something simply, but when you understand like mamish the deeper mechanics, then you have a whole much deeper appreciation of the truth, first of all, of this. Because I can just make statements. My speech gives me more wisdom, and you can theoretically challenge such a statement. And when I show you like the inner background mechanics of how this thing works, you can still challenge it all you want, but it's like I'm showing you the math, right? So this is how it works. Hainu sha'osios machrichim, which means the letters force. Shagam b'chinas penimius va'atzmus ha'or shelamayla b'chinas gilui. They force even that light, which is the inner essential light, which is above revelation. Yumshach v'yizgala gamken. It too should come out. In other words, the koach hamaskil was like holding on to a deep secret that even when it put ideas into your head, it didn't put those secret ideas into your head. But when you speak, the chokhmah of atik forces those secrets to come out. Therefore, specifically through speech, therefore you reach the depths of the seichel through speaking, which you would never have come across that information by just investigating it with your thoughts alone. And now let's make it a little avodadik. So it is in our actual daily prayers. By speaking the words of prayers. By the way, I noticed we're slowing down with the awesome davening a little bit. Why? People aren't showing up on time. People aren't davening together, and therefore no one's davening out loud, and you lose the train. Davening is such a precious thing you can do. We got to do it right. We're a strong team here. We got to make sure we're all operating on all of our cylinders. 9:30, you're into tefillin without question, right? That's how it goes. Not you're like, getting a coffee and making your way in, because the point is there's so much power to be gained in a proper tefillah. You get together and all of a sudden we've done it, right? We're not unaware of this. When it's loud in the shul, that means each person does not feel weird about saying their tefillah out loud, because that's what's going on. When you do that, it completely amplifies your entire existence for the day, for your life. So by speaking in tefillah, it shines in your soul the inner dimension of the intention. How do you like that? Right? The essential light of the Ein Sof, which is basically the kavanah that we have now. Right now we're developing kavanas. Right? We're going to think about these things in davening. And the idea is that as much as we're going to think about these things right now, when you daven with your mouth, the inner depths of the very ideas that you're trying to understand suddenly shine to you, and you're like illuminated with the penimius of the Or Ein Sof. You get all excited in your soul, much more than the meditation that you engaged in before you davened. And again, because the source of the letters are not only, they're also higher than the source of the midos. All this time we've been talking about that the letters are higher than the source of the intellect, but they're also higher than the source of the emotions, which are also like light. So the emotions also you can get mildly excited, or you can get like deeply excited about God from the essence of your soul. But how do you do that? You have to talk it out. Just like we said before, that the penimius of the idea is like summoned to emerge when you use your mouth. the panemius of your love and fear of Hashem, the depths of your soul and of your connection with God, it's summoned to emerge because it's forced out by the letters, the source of the letters pushing out this emotion. Kamosh yisbaer, as we will explain. And then I'm going to finish it because we started 15 minutes late. Uma shekol ma'oror kavanas halev. And this that we said earlier, that the voice arouses the kavanas halev. The voice here is not the letters. The voice is the sound that you make, right? Behind the actual physical, the structure of the letters. And we said the voice arouses the kavanas halev. Bechinas reusa de liba. We call this the will of the heart. This deep, essential kavanah of your heart. Tzrich lios. Tzrich lemor dahainu mishum deza me'atika achid v'talia. And that is because za, what is za? We now know what za is. Za is zer anpin. Zer anpin is your lave, right? Your heart. It refers to the emotional spheros inside of you. Right? So he says that zer anpin ba'atika achid v'talia. Which means that it is united and hanging off of atik. Kiyudu, as it's known, there's like such a statement basically from the Zohar that associates za as being united and hanging off of atik. That there's an association there with za and atik. Mikom mikom iker dafke k'shebah kol bedibor. So in other words, even if you just make noises like that, it also does the trick to a certain degree, because the voice arouses the kavanah of the lave, because even the voice, even za, to a certain degree is associated with atik. Right? What did we say before? I actually negated this, because we said that, no, malchus, which is where the letters are, that's what goes all the way up to the top, and accesses the atik. But remember we said, someone asked, well, what about your emotions? I said, no, that's more like light, which is more like chokhmah, which is essentially, its source is from the lower part of Kesser, not the higher part of Kesser. So you don't get that same kick when you use your emotions, right? It's more like on the light meter. It's specifically the letters and the vessels which go out to the top. But now he's saying a little piece of information. Za is somewhat low enough that it does have an association with the atik as well. And therefore, it's not exactly the same as the letters, as you're going to say in a second. It doesn't have the same source as the letters. It's a little bit lower of a source, but at least it's united and hanging, as it says, on atik. Which means if you use your voice, then you can also get a little kick from that atik level, not as much as letters, when you actually use the voice with words. And therefore, you'll notice that the voice itself arouses the panemius kavanah. But he says further, nevertheless, the main thing is when it comes into actual speech. Shu bechinas chomer gufa osios, which is the actual forming of the letters. In other words, not just the vowels, the actual consonants. But the vowels itself, because at least you're using your mouth, and the fact that it comes out is already some association with the atik, and therefore it does increase your kavanah, but not the same way that actually putting those vowels into consonants does. It knows the vowel and the consonant together, that you're actually saying things with your voice, not just using your voice. That goes all the way up to the source of the letters, atik itself, and that's what brings down the ultimate revelation of your davening. There's much more to be said here, but we'll stop now. We actually have only one more paragraph, and we're done the mimer. I thought we were going to do it today, but we got in circles a little bit. Tomorrow's Friday.